Okay, we have worked our way to lesson 10-4, and today we're going to talk about factoring to solve quadratic equations. Can we fit all that? Quadratic equations. Okay, one of my favorite areas. Okay, so this is when we start really getting closer to actually using the quadratic equation itself. Okay, so now we're going to solve these by factoring. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have some problems that are already factored. Okay, so remembering that we're making these equal to 0, you'll start off pretty simply with problems that look like this. And equals 0. And in this case, half of the work is done for you. So all we're going to have to do here is we're going to just say, okay, in order for this to equal 0, one of these has to equal 0. So we're going to break it apart and say x plus 7 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, so subtracting 7 from both sides gives us x equals -7. Here we're going to add 4 to both sides, giving us x equals 4. So in this case, we have two solutions, x equals -7 and 4. Okay, so I want you to see how easy this is to start off, and then all that's going to happen is that we are going to have to do our own factoring. Okay, so now understand that as we get further along, your numbers aren't always going to be pretty. So let's say we've got 6k plus 9 times 4k minus 11 equals 0. Okay, we've got a little bit more work to do here. 6k plus 9 equals 0, and 4k minus 11 equals 0. Undoing addition and subtraction first. Okay, giving me 6k equals -9. And over here, 4k equals 11. Okay, and now I will divide. And k over here is equal to negative, and we're going to reduce this, and we're going to divide it by 3. So this is -3 over 2, and over here, k is equal to 11 over 4. So two solutions, k is equal to -3 over 2 and 11 over 4. So understand the numbers aren't always nice and pretty like in our first problem. So that is just basic using this is called the zero product property. And the zero product property is just saying that if you have two binomials that equal 0, or any two things that equal 0, one of them must equal 0 in order for both to equal 0. So one of these has to be 0. They say it's so much nicer in the book, but anyway, that's me saying it. So let's look at solving these by factoring. Okay, so now our factoring comes into play, and so we have to remember that. So we're going to start with x squared minus 8x minus 48, and this equals 0. Okay, so -48. Okay, so we're going to build our parentheses. I know I have an x in both, and because I have a negative, that means I've got a positive and I've got a negative in order to get that negative 48. I'm going to look at my factors of 48. So let's look at, of course, 1 and 48. Well, that's definitely not going to get my negative 8. 2 and 24, still not going to do it. 3 and, let's see, what is that, 6 and 16, yeah, no, 4 and 12, bingo, 4 and 12 will do it, and my 12 needs to be negative, so my 4 goes here. Just always make sure you do a really quick check. I know that this is going to equal a negative 48, but this will give me a negative 12 and a positive 4, and that will give me a negative 8. So always remember to give yourself a really quick check. Okay, Mr. Googly Eyes just says, yeah, always check what you are doing. So now I'm going to break this up. X plus 4, let's not put that right there, equals 0. That's a little mistake, sorry. X minus 12 equals 0. Does not need to be in parentheses. Looks like Mr. Googly Eyes isn't watching me carefully enough. I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides there and add 12 here. And this will give me x equals negative 4. And this will give me x equals 12. And together, that's x equals negative 4 or 12. Two solutions, okay, to that problem. Okay, now, what happens if we don't quite have the proper form? So let's say we start with x squared minus 12x equals negative 36. Well, I can certainly fix that pretty quickly. I'm just going to add 36 to both sides. When I do that, it'll give me x squared equals, no, okay, another little blooper, minus 12x plus 36 equals 0. And now I'm ready to factor. I know I have an x and an x. This is negative here, and this is positive, which means that I have two negatives, and my factoring has to equal a negative 12, so I know that I'm going with 6's. Okay, so what I'm looking at is x minus 6 squared, okay, which means that since it's x minus 6 squared, I'm only going to have one solution to this, and so I don't have to do both of these. It's just x minus 6 equals 0, and adding the 6, I have x equals 6, and so this has one solution. Okay, so hopefully you have a really good idea of how this works and the factoring for it. Of course, the factoring can be a little bit more difficult. As I look at problems going forward, you will obviously be looking at problems that have an a factor in that equation that needs to be factored. So the only thing that will happen is that your problems will become more difficult with your factoring, but we're pretty good at that. So, so if we just look really quickly at, let's say 2c squared minus 7c equals negative 5. Once again, pulling that 5 over, ending up with 2c squared minus 7c plus 5 equals 0. And now we're just going to have to factor this. Okay, we'll have two negatives. I always look for certain things first. I know I've got 2c and 1c here. And now I have to figure out how to get a negative 7 from this. And so 5 and 1 is what we have to have. And so I think we need to multiply that 2c times a 1 and the 1c times a 5. So negative 5 times negative 1 gives us positive 5. 2c times 1 is just the 2c, and then 5c, so that makes 7c, and that equals 0. 2c minus 5 equals 0. c minus 1 equals 0. Add the 5, add 1, 2c equals 5, dividing by 2, and c equals 5 over 2. You can go 2 and 1/2. You can go 5 over 2. It started out in all integers, so you could go 2.5, okay, whichever way you are most comfortable. And on this side, c is equal to 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and say c is equal to 1 and 2.5. That is more comfortable for me, but you pick which way is best for you. So that's a more complex problem, not too horribly difficult, and I know that you all can handle it. So for another session, we say goodbye, and right there he kind of looks like he's smiling. Okay, thank you.